Good afternoon. Welcome to a special meeting that we're having on Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Student Director Denelson Garbio, Mika Smith-Dahl, Director Jamoki Hinton-Hodge, Director Yee, Director Torres, Director Gonzalez.
Here.
Director Harris, Vice President London.
Here.
And President Ng.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. The board will now recess into closed session. We will be taking up the items listed in the agenda. We will reconvene for a public session at 6 p.m. Thank you very much. The board is now in recess. We are ready to reconvene to public session. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a second roll call, please?
You guys, you can see what
Our two new student directors are absent. Director Yee. Director Yee.
Here.
Director Gonzalez. Director Harris. Director Harris. Director Hinton-Hodge.
Present.
Director Torres.
Present.
I believe I said Director Gonzalez. She's absent. Vice President London.
Here.
President Ng.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. There was no reportable action taken in closed session today. We have 3 items today on the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the general consent report? Moved by Director Harris and seconded by Director Torres. Was there any questions on the general consent report?
Yeah.
Seeing none, is there any public comment on the general consent report?
We have no registered public speakers, Madam President.
All right, Mr. Rakestraw, we're ready for a roll call.
On the roll call to adopt the general consent report, Director Harris, Director Yee,
Yes.
Director Hinton-Hodge, yes. Director Torres, yes. Vice President London,
Yes.
President Ng.
Yes.
The consent report is adopted.
Thank you. Under new business, we have 2 items that are listed. The first is item 19-0963. This is the collective bargaining agreement between the district and the Service Employees International Union Local 1021. Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Vice President London, seconded by Director Hinton-Hodge. Is there any questions or comments on this item? How about public comment on this item?
We have no registered, I'm sorry.
Please come forward and introduce yourself.
Since now that the agreement has been ratified totally, my question is now, because it's a rumor, and I'm just going by a rumor right now, that I already know that next year there will be cuts, and then the year after there will be cuts. So I was wondering, how are the members going to be paid? Before, from the school district board, you said that the teachers was being paid by the cuts of SEIU. So will now that the raises and the bonus will be, who's going to get cut this time? Is there going to be mid-year cuts coming up pretty soon in order for the monies to be allocated? Or are we going to look at some of the internal parts that we have in the district, meaning like when I came the other night and said about the $53 million that was spent on contractors and also consultants. So, we have to look at the whole picture of everything. Instead of cutting all the small individuals and classified, we need to look other ways in order to get this money, in order to make sure that the district stays solvent, we don't go under state receivership, and that everyone would be happy all the way around.
Thank you. Any other public speakers?
Quick comment.
Seeing none, just a point of clarification. We do not anticipate any mid-year cuts for the year 1920. The years of potential concern are 2021 and 21-22. However, we will not know until the closing of the books, which will be presented to the board on September 11th at our regular meeting, the status of where we are. Any potential cuts in the out year depends highly on how our actuals from the 18-19 school year. So we'll have a better picture, and what the county has asked us to do is to update the resolution that we had set forth that you're referring to after that date. So from October to March, we'll have a better understanding of our financial positioning. Director Torres and then Director Hinhaj.
So I just wanted to say that I do also want to put in a slight apology to the leaders that are here from SEIU for the fact that this didn't get done Wednesday, and it created some stress and undue consternation about what's the holdup. And obviously the county was dealing with the contract, but it was unfortunate that they have to come back in July for a special meeting, and even just get worried last week, because we do normally finish everything in June and we're not here in July at all. And so I don't think we're trying to set a precedent, and next year I do not expect to be sitting in this building in July at all. So I would imagine that we're going to fix this so that next year this doesn't happen. So I just wanted to say my personal apology, because I was getting messages and calls last week, and it wasn't necessary, I think, if it was able to be helped. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Torres. Director Hinhaj.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your service, and I too am happy, because I know that people didn't really believe or weren't sure, right? We had to wait for the county to do the validation of it, and so I didn't feel worried. I was, hopeful in knowing that was going to happen. So I think to that, though, we were having these conversations, and I hope Director Yee's still on, when we were just kind of talking about just the importance, just the importance of, supporting all of our bargaining units, all the folks that work with our young people. And so I think as we, I don't know when reopeners are, I'm not paying it, that's not in my head right now, but I do hope that we can go into the year. One, I was talking about this lack of get out of the scarcity mentality, because I think that we have a lot of resources, and I don't think that we have to be cutting people all the time when it looks like we need to, I am of the ilk that we need to be generating revenue, right? That's what fills in the gaps. We need to not waste things, looking at contracts more closely and things like that. So I just want to support, staff and the board in our work plan as we move forward to really kind of think about these things and think about the relationship with labor, because we've had a hard year. And so I think it'd be great to, we're ending this year now, to think forward around it's still not enough, and we got to do better, but it is going to, I think, be in some of the relationships in that particular way. And then to Madam President, because I know you pay attention, eagle eye to this stuff, and also probably talk to the county. So just, there was an interpretation that we were okay and on good footing, but are there any cautions or things that you're, that for you probably need to make sure we are understanding in that process?
Yeah, I think just the main thing to reiterate that we discussed at the last regular meeting last Wednesday, is that the multi-year assumptions that were presented with the target potential reductions for 2021, 2021, 22, it does take into account this contract, as well as the other contract that was agreed to. And yet, the unknown is sort of the closing of the books, and how that might change. If it is more favorable, it could push out the 2021 cuts to 21, 22. But I think in the county's letter to us, that was reiterated that for us to be able to afford this contract, we do need to look at addressing both 2021 and 21, 22. And the other point of that was that we are being encouraged, and I support this, to maintain the 3% reserve. So that's also what's driving a potential deficit in the out years. But I just want to reiterate that we are not looking at mid-year cuts for the 2019-2020 year. What we're doing now is just really trying to foreshadow the potential for 2 years out, 3 years out. So we're doing planning. To Director Hinton Hodges' point, we're looking at all the assets that we have, that we're really underscoring the work that's ahead versus having to live by crisis mode and address mid-year cuts. We know that is not a position we ever want to be in again. So there is 1920. We look good. We're looking at the out years at this point. Any other questions for this item? Looks like we're ready to vote. Mr. Rakestraw, we are ready for a roll call.
On the roll call to adopt the pending item, Director Yee?
Yes.
Okay. Director Torres?
Yes.
Director Harris? Yes. Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Vice President London?
Yes.
President Ng?
Yes.
The SEIU contract is adopted.
Yay. I just want to also just reiterate thanks. I know that it's unusual for us and unprecedented to be meeting in July, but of course this was of utmost importance. So we're happy that we were able to ratify the contract tonight. So moving on, we have one more item. It's 19-1502. It's a professional service contract between the district and Lucid Partnership. We received some questions about this, so we asked Mr. Preston Thomas, who has a new name that I have not yet memorized, to come to be able to provide more context and rationale for this contract and the need for this contract. So, Mr. Thomas, I'll turn it to you to be able to provide more information on this item.
Great. Preston Thomas, the Chief System and Services Officer for the district. Wanted to give a little context and a little background to the contract that's before you tonight. First of all, it is for an interim CFO. And in terms of how we got to the point to this candidate and this contract, there was a wide search that used all the referral networks that we have from Curtis Saricki was outreaching to people. I was outreaching to people in GFOA. Our county partners were
You explain GFOA.
the Governance Finance Officers Association.
Thank you.
And they surveyed a lot of people. The county partners were also trying to bring in candidates for us. At that point, we got to a list of about 8 different candidates that then we vetted and narrowed it down to 3. One of the things about that list of candidates is some people had differing levels of availability. There was one name that continually across all of these resources, all of our resources and all of our networking that kept rising to the top, and that was Luz Casares, and that is who this contract is for. Her background is she started in a large urban district, Chicago Public Schools, moved to Boston, worked in Boston Public Schools, moved to the state level, and then moved out to California to be a CBO in both Alameda and I believe it was Pleasanton. And one of the things that when we started talking to her, she has familiarity with Escape. She understands California laws. It comes super highly recommended around all the school finance. And so one of the things that I did want to point out is that if you look to the description of services to be provided, they almost align perfectly lock in step with the fiscal vitality plan and some of the feedback that we've gotten around our budgeting practices. Part of the reason why this is a contract is because it's an interim position. And secondly, it allows her to bring in some additional support in particular areas that she might need in order to develop some of the systems. And for example, one of the people that will be working with her is Candy Clark, who also worked with LA County Office of Education and has some experience working with county partnerships. So that is another person that she may be able to bring in as part of her contract to support us. The vision of this would be that over the next 6 months, as we start getting a lot of the fiscal systems in place, that it would put Oakland in a place where we can go out and start hiring for a CFO that would be a long-term CFO in around September. And so one of the key criteria is to get the operations across the system in a place in which somebody would come in and take over and kind of lead from that place. So that's what we're recommending for approval of this contract to move forward, and really excited that we had the opportunity to have this board meeting. I know you've pointed out that this is not a typical board meeting, but really we're able to make this, this agreement with her and her team last week.
Thank you. Before we move on to questions and public comment, is there a motion to approve item 19-1502?
So moved.
Moved by Vice President London, seconded by Director Torres. Questions from the board to Mr. Thomas about this item or anything that's come up? Director Harris.
So it's an interim position, but you'll start to hire for the permanent position in about 2 months, 2 or 3 months. And so is the goal to have some overlap between this and the full-time or permanent person. My second question is, in terms of what, I've lost my second question. To start with that one, I'll come up with my second question. Sure.
I think one of the things is that Oakland has historically had these really hard, abrupt stops with people in transitions. And we wanted to be really conscious of bringing somebody in, and I would be partnering with her as well, to working with the fiscal teams and the operations teams around kind of building systems around payroll, around purchasing, contracts, all of those things, because she's an expert in all of those areas. Then as we get those systems kind of laid out, it would allow for both our own internal teams to not have a harsh transition into the new person. So we could bring in the new CFO, that I would be able to be available there as well as support to transition off the systems that get created in the next couple of months.
Okay, makes sense. And will this person, do they anticipate being a part of the search for a full-time, or is it the understanding that this is 6 months and that's it?
It's definitely a 6-month contract, and I think that her participation in the recruitment and in terms of the transition is part of what we've negotiated in the scope of work.
Okay,
That's
so
actually the thing that, like, when we first interviewed her, one of the things was really about building around the GFOA practices was something that was really appealing to her. She actually is one of the reviewers for the Smarter School Spending Framework. So, like, she could help develop the budget development system and then hand that off. It was really important.
So the goal is that she would hand it off and not do the job in 2020.
That is correct.
Okay. And since the superintendent isn't here, so the biggest part of my concern is infrastructure. And so you have someone that does the job for 6 months and then they leave. What assurance do we have that knowledge will be transferred? That we, how are you thinking about that transition? Because she sounds like she has incredible skill set, someone we'd love to retain. So how are you planning for that transition, for the obvious departure of this person? Right. How is that going to work?
And that's where my role comes in, is that we're working side by side with each of the department leads around building the system so that there is that handoff. And so, and then because the CFO is a dotted line to me, so that we would be working in partnership with the superintendent and with the county. I think one of the pieces around this is that the county is offering, kind of a range of supports that we would be able to have me, the county, the superintendent, that there's a team of people like addressing these issues and building out the systems, so there is a seamless transition into the permanent CFO.
And the total cost for the folks that don't have the contract at home of the 6-month contract is what?
It's $176,000.
Thank you. Director Hinton-Hodge?
I'm supportive of this and really glad that I like the idea of the transition. I think I'm in line with maybe Director Harris's point. And maybe I should just talk to my colleagues, because I think that this is like some work plan stuff that I would want us to be really clear about, like what is, because Mr. Thomas is actually new in his position. There's a new design of central office. this is not an organization that I have watched in 6 months be able to say, oh, we're gonna like incorporate these practices and this is what we're about to do. Like, that's that. So I want to be confident, not have a scarcity mentality as I talk about, right? Like, I believe we can do this, but I just would want to see that we operationalize some real clear steps and maybe even professional development, something that's going to allow us to really look at, here's an expert coming in, doing the work, but then there's a whole nother cultural shift piece that needs to happen and this infrastructure piece that needs to happen. And so to me, that even says something about who you're looking for to hire, right? Like, so how do, and then the question becomes, then how do you attract that talent in? Do you pay them well? Do you empower them? So I just want to have, if this person's again coming in, I just want to make sure that we are building some fertile ground for the next person to really kind of come in. And I just don't want to be like, oh, we got this. And again, that's not being pessimistic as much as we don't have that practice, and it's not just a CFO position. It's not just your position. It's not just the superintendents, right? There are SEIU members that, you know, classifieds haven't had trainings regularly in professional development regularly for a really long time. So it is, you know what I mean? It's not about what's at the top. It's about like the whole function of the organization working together. And so, again, I'll leave that to us to task out as a part of a work plan. So I'm excited about it, but the timeline is just I think that's what's bugging me a little bit, and to know, your hiring process, who's a part of those conversations. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hinhaj. Any other questions? I had a couple. I think to your point, Director Hinhaj, I do think what I was hearing was that I think this bridge does help to prepare more fertile ground for a more permanent CFO. I recognize we've had significant transition and turnover that has been difficult, but if the emphasis is on building systems and Mr. Thomas is kind of the continuity portion, hopefully, that will help with the coherence. Mr. Thomas, could you talk about, one question I received was the difference between the types of support here and what the county consultants are providing and how those roles are defined. And then also, what about with the budget and finance / audit, those have been meeting regularly. Will this person be staffing that, or will there be somebody else that would be staffing that in the interim? Thank you.
So that's where the work begins after if we have this contract approved, we would start working the following day on creating and mapping out that work plan so that we are mapping out all those things. And I just wanted to list out a couple of pieces. Like, what's absolutely critical is that as we're closing the books, one of the primary responsibilities will be working with our interim controller around the closing of the books, right? As that happens, we will also be launching the budgeting for next year and making sure that the numbers and truing up kind of the budget for the adopted budget leading into the first interim, those are going to be critical dates for us. So I think that, and you can see that one of the items within the scope of work is around the audit. And there are going to be several audits that will be launching in quick order, and to have somebody with expert knowledge that has gone through this will help lead kind of how we staff those. I can't speak immediately to who would be staffing them, but that would be a conversation that we would have together to make sure that each of those responsibilities is covered. And as to the county and their supports, that's where actually the county support will be used differently, because it'll be more in a support function. They've been in a diagnostic function. Here are the things that need to be addressed. Now we're moving more into the phase of like supporting best practice and coaching. And one of the key words that actually was a really good selling point for me around this individual is when she looked at the scope of work, started in laying in the term coaching and support. Because I think she sees herself as being able to coach up the interim controller and coach up different departments that do need the additional training that can trickle down not just within that department, but also into the school sites that are actually, like when you're talking about budget and procurement, and that we would start looking at those areas and provide training for those folks as well. And there are a lot of best practices that the county has already identified. We just need to implement them. And so as the county teams come in, they would be supporting each of those functions that are listed here.
Great. Just two other quick points.
Sure.
One is that because there is a lot of vacancies in the fiscal department, is the plan to hold off until there's a permanent CFO to hire into some of those, or will there be hiring going on before we have a permanent CFO onboarded?
Right. There are 4 or 5 vacancies at this point that we are actively in the process of hiring for. I think actually to have somebody providing feedback as to who should be hired and some of the characteristics that we'd be looking for. But most of the key departments within fiscal are intact. The fiscal analysts are intact. The accounting team, they're down 1 manager. The accounts, the procurement team, the accounts payable, all the teams generally are fully staffed right now. There's just a few in the reorganization of state and federal into strategic resources. That area, there's a few vacancies in that position.
Great, thank you. I'm also want to just express that I'm supportive of this contract. This is actually the same person that I had brought on to help with some technical assistance a couple years ago when we were back in 2017. Remember that it's very, very, very small contract, but she was incredibly. Just incredibly knowledgeable and helpful, and actually was the one that pointed us in the way of the GFOA best practices, and so I think that she can be a big asset to the team and to the district. So I am supportive of this, and also am eager to get a permanent CFO on board so we can have some more continuity within the team. Yes, Director Hinhaj.
This became a trigger when you just said state and federal doesn't have people in it, because state and federal is like, we can't get fined there. That's our money comes through state and federal, and our accountability and compliance issues are there. So how do we not have people in that department?
There are people in that department. They're just hiring for several vacancies that are there.
But why do we lay off people in that department?
It was a reorganization plan that preceded me, but is really to align LCAP, the parcels, the state and federal, all within one area. And so there are several new positions that are coming on board, but generally speaking, I think that there's still 3 vacancies in that department.
Thank you. Director Yee, did you have any questions on this contract before we vote?
Pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to meeting her when we get back.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Yee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. We'll take public comment at this time.
I
Just
have no speaker card.
Please come forward and introduce yourself. Well, 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Michael Loudon. I am was the site council chair at Kaiser Elementary. I just think it's very odd that this contract comes up in July in a special meeting. I think it's odd that we're going to be paying in an optimal situation where we find a hire in September. We're going to be paying for 2 CFOs until December. I think that you're impinging on the autonomy of our new CFO by putting this contract in place. It just seems like a terrible and rushed idea. I'd ask you please to reconsider and not put this contract in place. Given the the grand jury report pointing to overspending in administration, it just seems a rather cynical step in July to spend $170,000 on a contract for something that should have been handled in-house. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other speakers?
President Ng, I'd just like to clarify that in his introductory remarks, Mr. Thomas described that we've had extreme difficulty in recruiting for this position, and that is why we find ourselves where we are today with this person as filling the gaps until we are able to fill this internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President London. Mr. Rakeshaw, we're ready for a roll call.
On the roll call to adopt the pending motion, Director Yee,
Yes.
Director Torres,
Yes.
Director Harris, Director Hinton Hodge, Vice President London,
Yes.
President Ing.
Yes,
The motion's adopted.
thank you. Those are all the items that we've covered today. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.